This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. You've found the virtual world of the Vickers Crossing podcast, and we welcome you to another edition today. Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square, in our third season now. And my name is Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
Better guy you won't find than that guy. I'm Kevin George from St. Aidan's Church over here in London, Ontario as well. Who's the other guy?
I'm Ian. I am here.
You are here.
That'd be Ian, and he's here.
He makes
I need to think. I need to do something crazy or get a diploma in a cool title so I can be like, I'm Ian and I have a PhD in butt kicking or something.
Ian, just make it up, man.
Make it up.
Oh, okay.
That's all we do.
I'll figure something out.
Yeah, nobody's going to go on Wikipedia and call you out or anything. So you can be whatever you want to be.
Don't tell anybody, but Rob and I, we sort of we bluffed our way into this. So.
Oh yeah.
So,
I've got 3 Stanley Cup rings. Did you know that?
That's
See?
right. Yeah,
it's easy.
and I won the sumo title in Japan last year.
That's a new game we should play.
Yeah.
Did it actually happen to us or not?
Yeah. Which one is a lie?
Which one is a lie? Two truths and a lie.
Two truths.
All right. Well, everybody, we're really happy you're here because we got a wonderful guest coming in today. He'll be entering into the Zoom room here in just a minute. John Pavlovitz is coming into the Vickers Crossing, and great writer and Twitter phenomenon. Everybody knows John on Twitter and follows him, and
he's a
force.
force.
Have a lot to say. Yeah, he'll have a lot to say today. So we're going to look forward to that. And Kevin will introduce him a little more formally when he gets here. But as always, we want to say hi to our sponsors before we begin our show. First, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And our thanks again to Dave Mullen and his staff for their support of our podcast.
Wonderful. I want to shout out to Carol Basada over at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved, folks. It's the old-fashioned neighborhood pharmacy back. If you have an opportunity, if you're in the London area, check in and say hello to Carol, and you'll have your own personal pharmacist, and you'll like that.
And last but certainly not least, we want to say a special thank you to Molly Maid. Molly, make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And many thanks to Trisha Lister for that.
I was speaking with Trisha Lister the other night, and I asked her if she could give us any insight on Molly's middle name. That's been an ongoing thing here the last few weeks. She didn't have anything, but we do continue to ask you out there in the Twitter world, the Facebook world, the internet world, the podcast world. If you happen to have a lead on what Molly Maid's middle name is, let us know. We did have one suggestion from Sally, who is in Amherstburg, and Sally says that she thinks her middle name is Esmeralda.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So
okay,
I think that's a lot. Molly Esmeralda Maid. I don't think that's. But
somebody asked me a few podcasts ago, what was the beverage container you had, Rob, when you were having on the podcast? Because I kept lifting this and drinking. So I just want to let everybody know these are Vickers Crossing mugs. Yep. And I still think we have some available.
We do. We have a few of those available. We have some T-shirts and some baseball shirts with that beautiful logo on it. And everyone you purchase supports keeping this going. So if you want to get that, just shoot us a note and we'll hook you up.
Right. Check us out on thevickerscrossing.com, and you can find out more there. All right. Before we bring John into the room here, we're going to take care of a little silliness. You guys ready for some silliness?
I love silliness.
Oh, yeah.
Love silliness.
Day. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, for another edition of the Vickers Crossing of sickness or suds. Right. So today, again, I've got a word phrase. It's up to the boys here to figure out whether it's a sickness, an actual disease, or something perhaps you don't want to come down with.
Right.
Or is it a sud, like a beer?
Okay.
It could be a beer from any part of the world.
Okay.
So our word today, guys, is Urbach. 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 Is that a sickness?
Urbach.
Or sud?
Sickness or a sud?
So
I'm trying to remember what the one was on Tuesday. Because it was I just wondering if you, because I'm trying to play the psychological game, like if you did the last one that time, maybe.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, tricky.
But I can't remember Tuesday, so I don't know.
Ian, why don't you go first? What do you think? Urbach, is it a sickness or a sud?
It sounds too. I don't know. It sounds kind of made up. I think it's a sud, in my opinion.
Well, it was on the internet, so it has to be true.
Oh, of course, right. Everything on the internet is true, without a doubt.
Indeed.
So I'm gonna say it's a sud.
Okay. Ian calls beer. Kevin?
Yeah.
I'll say sickness this time. I think it's a sickness.
Okay. Urbach is a sickness.
Ooh.
It's there's something called Urbach-Wiethe disease, and it's something that affects the skin, and it can cause lesions or scarring. It can affect your voice if you get a really harsh voice, and it was named after the scientists that discovered it, Urbach and Wiethe, and it's Urbach-Wiethe disease.
Okay.
So there you go. Yeah.
Wiethe disease.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we'll hope and pray that any of you out there who may have that are getting the relief you need. And
I believe there's the salve. If
there is a salve for that,
there may be a salve.
and if you're not getting relief for it, I suggest a 6-pack of something that's not called Urbach.
That might help too. Yeah, that might help too. All right, so that's sickness and suds. It's time now for Ask Ian.
Ooh, wow. All right,
Wow.
Ian. I'm
ready.
You're ready?
Yes.
Like you're totally ready.
100%.
Okay. Today's question comes from Pierre in Trois-Rivières. And I don't know, you ever been up that way in Quebec, up Trois-Rivières, Quebec?
Yeah, I went skiing up there in Trois-Rivières.
Yeah,
years ago. I think
Beautiful.
I got an OSTAP check at the beginning of September. My buddy and I went skiing in October, November.
It's a beautiful area. When my first parish was up in Labrador West, and the way you get there is you leave Quebec City and you drive for a day and a half through an incredible part of the country. The last part being 12 hours of wilderness, but you drive up the North Shore of Quebec and you drive through all kinds of a little bit of South Shore, the North Shore. It's a beautiful area. Anyway, Trois-Rivières. Trois-Rivières Pierre wants to know, which is up near the St. Lawrence Seaway. So they're into boats up there. They want to know, what would you name your boat if you had one?
I would name it the USS SSU.
No. Boats have a name, and you're in Canada.
Sir.
You go with something like HMCS, Her Majesty's Canadian Ship. We're not in America, but then you have to pick a name, like the Pinafore. Or...
I would call it the Queen Anne's Lace.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's good.
I thought you were going to go with
lace.
I thought you were going to go with something like "Don't fret" and spell it like the thing on the guitar.
No, I was thinking of like the Mayflower, which is the first boat that came to mind. I don't know if it's the best boat that comes to mind other than the Titanic.
Yeah.
But I was like, a Mayflower is like a nice name. I was like, what's another kind of flowery name? And I was like, okay, Queen Anne's Lace was the first one that came to mind. So
in Newfoundland, all the fishing boats are named, and a lot of them are named after their children or their parents and all. So you'll get like the Lily. Remember the Donald and Lillian down in the eastern corner of the Harnham. Shout out to the Harnhams in Whiteway. I think there were 11 of them. But Don and Lillian had 11 kids, and their fishing boat was called the Don and Lillian. What would you call your boat, Rob?
Well, I think I would want my boat to kind of mirror something positive, uplifting, something hopeful. So how about the Monumental Disappointment? Now, see, that's a boat.
Yeah, well, you could call it the Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Memorial Boat. You'll need a you'll need a broad bow to paint it on.
That's right.
And I think my choice would be the Vickers Crossing. I'd call our boat.
You'd call it the Vickers Crossing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't let him get a bus, so we're going with a boat. We're going with a boat.
Well, I did that, or you go with something like. I don't know. I like these creative names. Like, you'll get like it's like Ian's dad is in a band. He's a drummer in a band, and they're all bank guys. So tell them what the name of the band is.
The band name is Accrued Interest.
See, and so they could have a boat, and they could call it Accrued Interest, and you could spell that many ways. You could put a crude, like CREW, like the crew of a boat, Accrued Interest, or you could write it like the bankers write it, Accrued, or you could put like a crude, like I usually am, crude. Like there's
I like
all,
that. Yeah.
Did you hear
Come
about
up with a lot of
the
good stuff.
Did you hear about the British TV show? I can't remember what it was called, but they named a boat Bodie McBoatface.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Bodie McBoatface.
Well, that was
Bodie
you know what
McBoatface.
that was? The Bodie McBoatface was one of the suggestions for the name of, I don't know if it was a Canadian ship or maybe it was a British ship, but they had a contest to name one of the Coast Guard vessels or something like that. I can't remember. I'm getting the details wrong.
Yeah.
And the leading candidate was Bodie McBoatface.
Nice.
It never won because they were like, we're not naming the boat.
Yeah.
would
I heard
think
about it.
I'd want to maybe name it after one of my favorite movies, Jaws, and that great line, "We're gonna need a bigger boat."
We're gonna need a bigger boat. Well, you could name your boat Bigger Boat.
Bigger boat. This is the bigger boat they needed in Jaws when things didn't go so well.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Well,
That's
anyway.
that's a
I
great
hear
segment.
some knocking on the door. So we're going to bring in our guest here in the Vickers Crossing. Great to welcome John Pavlovitz. So let's push the buttons we need to push in, and we'll get John in here. And John Pavlovitz has found us here at the Vickers Crossing, and he's in the Zoom room. John, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Rob. It's a joy to be with you today, my friend.
Great. Good. It's good to see you. We've got lots to talk about today. We know there might be a few things going on down in your neck of the woods of the U.S. we might want to touch on. So we're going to get to that coming up here in just a minute. But I'm going to ask Kevin to just give you a formal introduction to all of our listeners and viewers on the podcast. Kevin?
Yeah, happy to do so. I think you're down there in North Carolina, aren't you?
I am for the time being.
Wasn't there a big rally there just a day or two ago?
Yeah, we get visited a lot lately by certain people, so
Yeah,
it's so special.
Yes, they call them super spreaders.
Yeah, that's
Whoa.
So John Pavlovitz is a writer, a pastor. He's an activist. The man is prophetic, quite frankly, in Wake Forest, North Carolina. In the past 4 years, his blog, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, has reached a diverse worldwide audience. You'll know that John is a 20-year veteran in the trenches of local church ministry. He's committed to equality, diversity, justice, both inside and outside faith communities. In 2017, he released his first book, A Bigger Table, which I have to tell you, for me, was manna in a desert. It was when I read your book, I thought, wow, this is a guy. And then I found a blog after that, and I've been following you ever since. His new book, Hope and Other Superpowers, arrived on November 6th. You can also pick up a copy of a book form of some of the selected writings of the blog called Stuff That Needs to Be Said. And all of these are fantastic, and we hope you get them. And if you don't do anything else, go follow John on Twitter because it's the sanity in America right now. So John, welcome to the Vickers Crossing.
Thank you. Before we begin, I should just ask you to keep an eye out if there are any homes for sale in your area. For no apparent reason.
This is a recurring theme. We had Diana Butler Bass, and we've had a whole series of you sort of authors from America, Karen Gonzalez, and we get done, and they say, well, now listen, after November 3rd, we may be looking for a place.
Yeah,
That's right.
We were rooting really hard in the basketball game last night. So
Yeah.
we just tried to prepare for what may be
That's
happening.
right. Just remember the hashtag We the North, John. You'll be fine. That's the Raptors, baby. So listen, let's jump right in. I want to get started on the most obvious, which is, yesterday again with Donald Trump and now Bob Woodward. The part that kills me is that Donald Trump thought he was going to match wits with Bob Woodward. That to me is just the best joke of all. But he gave 18 interviews to this esteemed writer. And now we're hearing about, he knew all about the dangers of this. A lot of us sort of painted him to be a buffoon, a fool, and maybe he just doesn't get it, what they're telling him. But what's clear is he did get it, and he did sort of, hide it all, or play it down at least. You write in Things That Need to Be Said, America is in a cultic crisis, and Trumpism is the cult. There is no other way to approach these days. When you believe one man above science, above our intelligence agencies, above former CIA directors and retired generals and revered journalists, when you believe that one man above even your own eyes and ears, you are fully indoctrinated. Just note, this morning he tweeted that an insult to Bob Woodward. Well, Bob Woodward knew about this back in February. Why didn't he tell you people? What are you talking about? You don't get to make that accusation. That's a good argument. It's a good thing to discuss, but you're not the guy to discuss it. Anyway, there's no doubt that this whole thing, and for us Canadians watching this, it's like, what does he have to do before people turn on him? It really is cultish. Now, you've been very outspoken on your blog and on social media about your feelings about Trump and those who prop him up, quite frankly, and not just him. And none of these things seem to matter to those who follow behind him. So what will it take to change things in November? I mean, do you get a sense that there's any traction with any of this, or that people are beginning to open their eyes?
There really is. I mean, it's just such a slow erosion. And what I think the biggest part of what we're dealing with right now is people who supported him. They aren't a monolith, so they've supported him for a number of different reasons. So there's the theological component there. They voted a certain way their whole lives. They've been a part of a certain party. There's an expectation that they do that. And what you realize as you talk to people is a lot of them are horrified, but to go against him and to admit their mistake, they're not only going against their vote and they're admitting that, but they're also opening up the fractures in their communities and their relationships. They could be risk being expelled from community that's really important to them, family, church, social circles. So that's the thing. There are people, I think, who are deciding, am I going to risk that? And if they're not supporting him, or if they're regretting their support, they're doing it quietly. I think whatever the polls are now are irrelevant, and we're going to see when people vote. But I think there's been a slow kind of fade from some of these people, but many of them publicly, they will just never admit it.
Wow. And that 35% that seems to be solidly behind him is very demoralizing. At least I feel it is.
Yeah.
It's like, how could it possibly be that 3 or 4 people out of every 10 I know in America, well, it's not true to people I know, because I know people who are obviously, but how could that be? Like, how could you possibly, and because we live in church circles, and, it's just odd to imagine that that's what people are prepared to put up with.
And it's a strange phenomenon to go out to the grocery store and to be in your head thinking that, to say, is that one of them? Are you one of them? I know some of my neighbors who are, and that's the sad part, the demoralizing thing about it, because you realize as a pastor, as someone who's been in ministry and been a Christian most of my life, that the lion's share of what we're talking about is coming from professed Christians.
Yeah.
It's not the atheists, and it's not the liberals and the Muslims. It's really people who are saying, I am a conservative Christian, and yet that's where all this is, the anti-mask stuff is coming from, the anti-Black Lives Matter, the anti-immigrant rhetoric. It's just all fueled by people who profess to follow Jesus, and that's the non sequitur.
Wild. And isn't Lindsey Graham from your neck of the woods?
Yeah. We've got this South Carolina, North Carolina is really a hotbed of some of this. On the other hand, there's really, we've got Reverend Barber, and there's a movement counter to it. But when I came here from the Northeast, so I was up in the Syracuse area where I was born. And so you got to the American South, and was really eye-opening to see how ensconced, that thing is in the church, that political, it's the theocracy, really.
Yeah.
But as as you mentioned, and we'll talk about, it's really not even evangelical Christianity anymore. It is Trumpism. It's a completely other thing.
Yeah. And like you said, I never thought of it this way, though, is that they identify their self with that. Like that's and to be expelled from community or ostracized from community, that's a real powerful force. And whether it's that, or we've all experienced that in some way, where you just kind of stick to your guns because you don't want to be outside of the group, right?
Right. And I've been fortunate, I'm part of a progressive faith community, and because of the work that I do, I meet all sorts of people who share my beliefs, but I talk to people every day who are in this little, cluster where geographically around them, they don't have people who believe what they believe. Right. And so it isn't really easy for them to even find places of rest where they can be authentic, where they can talk about the things that matter to them. And so it's terrifying for a lot of people. That's where you see that peer pressure, that affinity tribe.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which, so that leads me to a question, because I wanted to talk about something that you wrote about in the current climate that's having, and the climate that we're in is having a real adverse effect on relationships. And that's really what this is all about, relationships, both the politics and religion of it all, because they seem to mingle in the States and in America. And in one of your blog posts, you write about the pain of no longer recognizing people that you love. And you point out how many are shaped by Fox News and how they've abandoned values that you once loved in them. And I just want to read a little bit of from the blog post that you wrote. I love my relatives, my former church members, my high school friends, and my neighbors, but I grieve what has happened to them. I lament the poisoning of their once soft hearts and the way Jesus has been all but squeezed out of their religion. I fear that they'll never fully recover from the alternative narrative that these past 3 years have written into their brains about the world and about disparate people and about the expansive, lavish, audacious love Jesus calls us to extend. I only hope these moms and ministers and nurses and school teachers and football coaches and favorite relatives get a truer story or meet someone who wakes them up or rediscover Jesus enough that they change the channel, turn off the TV, and find the truth that sets them free. God is love. We are our brother's keeper. Kindness is the better path. May it be so. That's real powerful, because we're in relationships, and you're still, and we all are in relationships with people that we may have kind of been separated from because of the climate. How do we navigate through these new relationships we found out and try to keep them some way healthy and at least connected? Because this is tough.
It is. And that's the thing, which behind the writing, people will label someone like myself or, angry. And sometimes, yes, but that anger is usually a symptom of a grieving. And it is the disbelief that you experience. And I think for myself and for everyone, there is a balance between knowing how much to try and preserve that relationship, and then knowing when that relationship is actually going to be the collateral damage to you speaking out on something that you believe in. Yeah. So, in writing some of the things I've written, losing former church members and friends and family members, even though I tried to retain those relationships, I realized that my stance was going to be a barrier for them. And in many ways it had to be, because that led me to a whole new group of people. And it also helped people who I would never have reached had I not been explicit about the things I believe. So it's always a balance of trying to preserve the relationship and then knowing when your convictions are the thing that you need to preserve.
Right. It's really hard though. Like, I mean, I'm a bit like you in the sense that I believe, I'm not shy about saying what I believe, but so if it's family or friends, I mean, it must be really difficult.
Well, it is. And for someone like myself, a lot of people can go to a family gathering and their family members don't necessarily know everything that they believe about everything. I walk into the room and people have, a laptop out.
Did you write this, you little shit?
or they already know and they're getting, prepared for me to come. But really, I mean, that's what the story here and the story in America, but elsewhere, is that no matter what happens in our political environments, nothing is going to change. So for us, November 4th, all these realities will be there. Those fractures are going to be there. In fact, they'll probably be more profound. And so what do you do as a person of faith and morality and conscience? And I tell people to keep doing, you have to show people an alternative way of living in community. So for me, I have to show those Trump Christians that there is actually an interdependent community that looks really like the church is supposed to look, and you have to sort of wake up their imaginations, because they've been so long in this really small Christianity, it doesn't occur to them.
Yeah.
They see lack when they look at someone else. They see scarcity. They see, if they get something, I'm going to lose.
Right.
And then when you try to show them that there's actually abundance in community, then you hope that some of them will see it.
That's really right.
And that, you know, we had Richard Beck on the podcast a little while ago, author and writer and such, and he's wrote a book called A Stranger God. And in that he was talking a bit about this idea that, you know, leaning into those relationships and the brokenness of some of those relationships can actually be the place that we discover Jesus, that we see Jesus, that God shows up. So sometimes, as much as I say this in my parish to my parishioners, you know, we're going to have things that we're going to disagree on and break us apart, but is there an opportunity that God's going to show up in that somehow?
Well, and that's the thing. We often we talk about the early church, and we're trying to live like the other church. But if we really read those stories, you know, there were these, you know, personality clashes, and there were factions, and there was impulsiveness, and there was jealousy. And so, if we want to be like the early church, we're going to have turbulence. And I think that's something that what's happened, at least in America, is that turbulence is now unavoidable. When you see the Black Lives Matter protests, when you see what happened in the murder of George Floyd, it was almost as if all these Christian communities, whether conservative or progressive, they couldn't avoid it any longer. They couldn't have that safe, sanitized community. And so it's always going to be for the better, I think, for the church to be more honest and to talk about more things instead of less. So this is, it's definitely a crucible for us to become something better.
Well, it's you know, we've had a few people on, Steve Patterson, when he was talking about the forgotten creed, you know, there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, man or woman. And it was to the early church, which was living in these divisions of who could sit at the table and who couldn't, and all that stuff. So you're quite right. And one of the things we've talked about a lot on here with different people around this COVID time is there's something sort of apocalyptic about it in a way, because there's been an unveiling of all these things, right? Like, you know, when things have been unmasked, injustices have become very presently aware to everybody. We can't avoid it.
Yeah. And people think, you know, that I'm always talking about this person, this politician, and I'm always trying to remind them that I know who and what he is, and he has not created any of this. He's just revealed it. He's made it acceptable for people. He's given permission. And so now that we've seen it, it's not going to change no matter who's in the White House and who's in the churches and who's leading in government. So it's really up to us in the trenches of local churches and in our daily lives to figure out some of this stuff. We have to transcend our leadership to do it.
Yeah.
I want to bring Ian on board here, because I know he had a question for you, Ian.
Yeah, and it sort of builds off what you were talking about. You write on one of your blog posts about the cost of still giving a damn, which is fantastic. You write,
Ian, I'm going to interrupt you there. Ian loves to give a damn. He's really big about giving a damn. He gives so many damns, it's unbelievable. All right, Ian, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. You write, there's a cost to compassion, a personal price tag to cultivate empathy in days where cruelty is trending. In your body and in your head and in your midst, there is a collateral damage to you giving a damn when others do not. And it manifests itself in many ways: irritability, impatience, physical illness, emotional eating, addictive behavior, the inability to be present to the people who love you, and obsession with social media, a fixation on how jacked up everything is. You go on to say, yes, the world is upside down right now, but we can make it right, one beautiful act of decency at a time. Get some rest and keep going. The world needs more people like you. Blessed are the damn givers, for they will right side the world. It is clear to anyone who follows you that you obviously give a damn, which is great. What was some of the prices that you have paid, and what has been the cost of your compassion and giving a damn?
Wow. Well, I think immediately there was the loss of ministry. You know, when I started writing more explicitly, I knew, because of the places where I was, I had a more progressive pastor that came to me when I was really struggling, and he said, I know the kind of church where you are, and it's not going to last. He says, because you no longer fit there. And so this is advanced severance pay to prepare yourself. And so, you know, I just decided I was going to be an authentic pastor rather than necessarily an employed one. So, you know, I lost my job, and I found this other audience. So that was a small price to pay for me, because what you lose on a daily basis is you lose a little bit of hope in humanity, or you lose some sleep. But you know, as a person of profound privilege, that's always going to be small in comparison to people who are living every day with this sort of invasive trauma. And so, yeah, I've lost some things, but I think for me, it's always realizing that I come from a place of advantage already. Mm-hmm. And so whatever I lose, it's going to be well worth what I'm hoping to do with the work. So, yeah.
That's an important observation, actually, for, you know, the four of us on the screen here are pretty privileged. So, yeah. So, you know, like, I mean, when we speak up, you know, or when we become an ally, or when we, you know, do any of those things, yes, there's a cost, but I mean, as you say, I'm taken by you saying we're coming at it from a place of incredible advantage to start with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I started to realize, before all this happened with the pandemic, I was traveling quite a bit, and I started to see myself not as a pastor or a blogger, but as a sort of a war correspondent. Yeah. I would get into a new town and I'd say, tell me what's happening here on the ground, and I can tell the folks back home. And so I'm meeting with transgender teenagers, and I'm meeting with Black activists and Muslim families, and you know, Latino fathers living in churches right now. And they're telling me their stories, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I relay this? And so that's always in my mind doing this work that I do, the profound distress that people are in. And if, in our case, in America, if we get 4 more years of this, people will not be able to withstand it. So.
Well, what I worry about is the spillover effect, because I said this on a previous podcast, but one of our previous prime ministers, father of the current prime minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, said that living next to you is like sleeping with an elephant. It may be a beautiful creature, but every time it moves, twitches, or snores, it has an effect on you. And so, and right now we've got, you know, it's you know, we have a politician here in this country whose catchphrase is, take Canada back, which sounds an awful lot like make America great again. And his latest thing now was, there's a new one that just came out the other day. That's another sort of reflection of his buzzwords. But anyway, you write about a lot more than politics. I mean, one of the reasons I was drawn to your writing a few years ago with A Bigger Table was just the broad, expansive, generous, open and loving theology that you have and that you express so very well. And I think it's a theology for our time. And I think at least what I've found, I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years as well in church communities. Rob now for, I guess, over 10 or 12 years or something like that. And Ian hangs out with us. But what we see is people want love. They want to be included. They want to be cared for. They want to be nurtured. They want to be supported. They want to be held, forgiven. All those things, you know, that you write so eloquently about. And one of the things I think that people are facing, particularly during this COVID time, is a lot of grief. And, you know, people are grieving a whole lot of different things right now, for a whole variety of different reasons. And I was taken by one of your blog posts, which you put in the book as well, in the compilation. I think that the title of the blog was "Everyone Around You is Grieving," and this is what you write: every single human being you pass by today is fighting to find peace and to push back fear, to get through their daily task without breaking down in front of the bananas or in the carpool line at the post office. Maybe they aren't mourning the sudden tragic passing of a parent, but wounded, exhausted, pain-ravaged people are everywhere, every day, stumbling all around us. And yet, most of the time, we're fairly oblivious to them. Parents whose children are terminally ill, couples in the midst of divorce, people grieving the loss of loved ones and relationships, kids being bullied at school, teenagers who want to end their lives, people marking the anniversary of a death, parents worried about a depressed teenager, spouses whose partners are deployed in combat, families with no idea how to keep the lights on, single parents with little help and little sleep. Everyone is grieving and worried and fearful. And yet none of them wear the signs. None of them have labels, and none of them come with a written warning reading, "I'm struggling, be kind to me." And since they don't, it's up to you and it's up to me, you write, to look more closely and more deeply at everyone around us, whether we're at work or at the gas station or at the produce section. We need to assume that all are just hanging by a thread, because most people are hanging by a thread, and our simple kindness can be that thread. In A Bigger Table, your book, you write, which I think relates to this, it's funny how little it takes to show people they matter and what a difference it makes in inviting them into meaningful community. Kindness, it turns out, is still powerfully disarming. I wondered if you can say more about this. I mean, particularly now with COVID, I mean, I just think, for me, the people in my parish who are dealing with illness, it seems like it's magnified. If they're dealing with death, it's magnified. They've not been able to grieve properly because they haven't been able to gather for ritual. If they're dealing with job loss, it's magnified. Everything is magnified. And we're all standing 6 feet apart, and we're wearing masks at the grocery store, and we're doing all this, and everybody's on a little bit of an edge. And I think that kindness is so critical that you write about right now. So I wonder if you can say more about just how we can have such a different affect on the world by seeing that sign that may not be hanging around someone's neck. Sure.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite scripture passages is in the Gospel of Matthew, and Matthew writes that Jesus is going through the towns. He's preaching, teaching, healing. He's doing his thing, but it says when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And I always, marveled at the way that Jesus was seeing what the world was doing to them. He was looking at their internal condition, and that was sort of driving him. That was propelling him to do what he did. And, going back to my time as a student pastor, much of my life, I would walk into a room and try to scan the room and look for the people on the periphery and look for the people who were not comfortable. And that's where I sort of moved. And I try to do that every day in my travels and on social media. And right now you realize that's pretty much everyone, because as you mentioned, there's this compounded nature, and we're grieving in an unnatural way. The way grief normally works is you lose someone, they die, and there's an event, and you spend your whole life processing that event. And this is such an unnatural grieving because it's so relentless, and it's an accruing loss. And I think our systems they're not prepared for that. Right. And so the job of the person of faith and morality and conscience is to step into that space and say, how can I be an agent of compassion? Talk about A Bigger Table. I'm actually sort of writing this kind of continuation of that book. And the idea is that if your theology and your religious worldview doesn't leave the world more compassionate and kinder and generous, it's what point is it? And so that's where, if God shows up, it's got to make people feel more seen and more heard.
Yeah, that's really quite it, isn't it? I mean, it's and we've heard a lot through this COVID time with the people we've had on here about extending tables and about I think Diana Butler Bass put it, what'd she say? Something like a beautifully appointed table. Like, it's that sort of idea of doing what we can to actually make somebody else's lot better. Right? And I think about it, not to go back to the politics, but I guess we can't avoid it. But I know yesterday your blog post was about, not choosing the lesser of two evils. I mean, can you say a word or two about Joe Biden? I mean, I think, what's interesting to me is we have Michael Ware on, and he was Obama's faith advisor in the last campaign. And so he was talking about how so much of the Democratic National Convention was focused on what really is what we're talking about here, how Joe has been present. You talk about grief and what he's been through in his life. And how he has used that as a platform to be present for others and to make others' lives better. So it's really an insult to say it's a choice between lesser of two evils, because I don't think it's even close. But could you say something about that?
Well, I think, and that's what you marvel at, and knowing, Hillary Clinton and a little bit about her, she regardless of what someone thought about her policy or her politics, she was a lifelong Christian. She had churches that she's been a part of and that she participated in. And the same goes for Joe Biden. You know, he's been a Catholic for his whole life. He's been that's been an integral part of what motivates him, regardless of whether you agree with him or not. And you can just look at his life and see a capacity for empathy that someone like Donald Trump simply doesn't possess. And so as a Christian, that should be the first red flag. That should be the first thing that I look for is, do you care about other people? And if you don't, there's no justification. And what I find that most Trump supporters who claim Christianity, the way that they do that is they talk about God. Because they can superimpose God and they can make God do anything they want. They really don't usually talk about Jesus, because you can't take the teachings of Jesus and really fudge them in that way. You can't take the Sermon on the Mount and make it amenable to someone like Donald Trump. So that's the key for me. I keep taking those words and the teachings of Jesus and holding them up like a mirror and say, I can see those things in Joe Biden. I can't see them in Donald Trump. If maybe you can, then show me.
Yeah. And when you see somebody like Biden who, not just because he's a Christian, but because he has suffered tremendous loss and has almost authority to enter into the pain and suffering of others because he's been in it. And when you have that authority and can enter into that and be humble and giving and that sort of thing, it means more, right?
Yeah, and it flips, I think for a lot of people in America, it flips the idea of what does it mean to be strong. Yeah. And I think that's the oxymoronic thing is that, here's Jesus and he would be ridiculed by Trump supporters. He would be called soft. He would be called a snowflake because of his capacity to care. And that's what I think. There's a great movement here of progressive and moderate Christians who are saying, we have to vote. We can vote our consciences and enter into that arena, which I think the Democratic Party for years has sort of abandoned religion largely because it's so fraught with messiness. And that's why they sort of relinquished Christianity to Republicans, which is why we have what we have now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because I've had a couple of debates of late with people who, just to shift gears a little bit, are Christian Democrats, but really get irate about something which I want to get your take on, which is guns. I was astounded recently on social media to get into this long debate with a guy I know who's a faithful Christian, who really feels strongly about Jesus and guns. And so the gun thing seems to cross over the Democrat Republican thing a little bit, is obviously what I've learned about America, but when I watch the people who come out to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, the protest, with their Trump flags and their pickup trucks, and they look like the Al Qaeda pickups in the Middle East,
right.
And they're standing on the truck beds with AR-15s and signs about Jesus. I wonder, like, how do you square that Jesus and this fascination with the violence of guns?
Well, I mean, you really can if you're going to use the Bible, and that's why we have that. Trump Christians will say God and country, or God and guns, and use those two words together. Never Jesus and guns, because those are rather ridiculous to try to put together.
Yeah.
And I think it shows you the sort of polluted, toxic Christianity that people have grown up in so long that it doesn't even occur to them that there's a disconnect. So they'll say, well, Jesus tells his disciples to go grab a sword, when he's in the garden. And I said, well, you never follow that story through to where Peter uses a sword and Jesus condemns him and says, my people aren't going to be like that, and then heals the man.
Right.
And so, we have this phenomenon here when the pandemic started. You had these long lines in supermarkets, but you also had gun stores that were packed. And, so many of these people will say, well, I don't need a mask because God will protect me, but they'll carry a gun everywhere they go to get groceries.
God can't protect them from the person at the grocery store. They need a gun.
Yeah. And meanwhile, most of the liberals, we're against guns, or we don't use them. So what are they afraid of us for? I'm always marveled by the fact that I'm some sort of threat, but I'm here telling you that I'm against those things. So I'm unarmed. you know?
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't
There
make
was
sense.
the one image I saw last week was a group gathered. I think it was in Louisiana because it was a demonstration for Breonna Taylor, and they all stood in a parking lot with their sand colored camouflage in which is I found interesting anyway, but and
Where are you?
I'm sure intelligence is not a big part of this. I shouldn't be this cruel, but they're all there with their AR-15s with the Bible open having a prayer before they head off, and it's just alarming to me. I just find it.
I would have wanted to know what part they were reading. Like, what page are you on, man?
They read Psalm 23 and they read Psalm 91. Is what they read. They read Psalm 91 because they're covered in the blood of Jesus. They're not going to get the virus. And they read Psalm 23 because they're going to go through the valley of the shadow of death. And they'd be the next Rittenhouse or whatever poor young fellow's name is. That poor young man is a victim of a culture which has consumed him to believe violence is the answer. You know, he's 17 years old. His life is finished. It's stupidity.
And that's what, the bottom line for me is this, being a pastor for this long, that's the thing. You're trying to help people understand that this is such an inverted idea of God or love or goodness that you just don't know how they can't see it. And you're trying to figure out what way to reach them. Is it through theology? Is it through scripture? Is it through storytelling? Is it through talking about marginalized people? Is it trying to find our commonalities? And right now there's just certain group of people that are not going to see it because their identity is just too much tied into being right about him.
Yeah, well, it's fun. You were right, though. I mean, as I think about the images, nobody talked about Jesus. So.
Yeah, it doesn't show up. We mentioned your book, John, and I want to point people to that too. A Bigger Table, Building Messy, Authentic, and Hopeful Spiritual Community. Certainly recommend that to folks. You conclude your book with some wonderful words here I want to share with our viewers and listeners. I really want God to be big enough. I want the table to be big enough. I still seek a church that is not the least but the most diverse place on the planet. I still dream that the life of Christ can be fully incarnated in the people who bear his name. I want this faith to produce something more redemptive than choosing sides and building silos and pointing fingers. I want it to generate hope, to yield goodness and produce mercy in ways that defy description and explanation and denying. I am holding out hope for true communion, but it's really not up to me alone. It's in the hands of you who claim faith in Jesus, from wherever you find yourself standing and however you align yourself and whatever you see your personal calling as a Christian to be. And it's up to you, regardless of your faith, tradition, or religious affiliation. It's about the eyes with which you choose to see this life, this world, yourself, and the other. I still do believe in the bigger table, but it's more difficult than ever to keep that faith, probably because the resistance to it is so great. We have to be the resistance to that resistance. In the face of a loud hatred, we need to be a louder, more loving response. We have to become activists of goodness. It's 3 years later. Being activists of goodness seems to be getting harder and harder in these times. John, are you still hopeful?
No. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
Come on now, John. We know you give a damn. You can't answer that way. Sorry, that won't do.
All right, wrap it up, guys.
It's funny. The publisher is releasing a revised version of that book in a month. And they asked me to write a new opening chapter for the book. And so I did. And basically I said, I was a different person when I wrote that book. I was optimistic and I was effervescent and bubbly. And I think I look like a young Brad Pitt. I don't know what happened, right? But I talk about hopelessness is not an option. For me, it's an insult to the people who've come through adversity before. Mm-hmm. So you have your days when you really do get despondent and disheartened. But for the most part, you keep getting up every day and saying, okay, I know people are out there who are unsettled by these things, or are asking the same questions, who are trying to figure out how to love people better. And you just lean into that. You seek out those people and you try to help them. That's why community is so medicinal in all this. And so, yeah, hope comes and goes in certain days, but for the most part, you get up and you say, this is my place and time in the history of the planet. And we have work to do.
Yeah.
Did you say go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
Sorry. As you were saying that, I was remembering a great spiritual mentor I had when I was first in seminary. And her question to me was, what gets you out of bed in the morning when you know you're done for?
Mm.
And I still go back to that on those despondent days.
Yeah.
You know, what's going to get me out of bed? Because I could just stay here, really. You know, none of my parishioners aren't knocking on my door. But what gets me out of bed? And the answer for all of us is different. But there's something.
Yeah, I talk about it in Hope, actually, that there's this burden, there's this internal kind of disturbance that we have, that we look out and we see, this really bothers me. And often that's the thing. I say, what is the burden that I feel? Because that burden is something I'm particularly going to be passionate about and positioned to do something about. Mm-hmm. And so I just tell people, where is the burden? And then follow that.
Yeah.
I just going to say, Rob, that Ian was planning on reading the book and you ruined the ending for him.
Oh, sorry. Well, there's a new ending apparently. We'll wait for the next
endings. Different books have a different ending.
Yeah. I mean, nice guy. Rob was here. Was Ian desperately waiting to read John's book, and Rob comes in and says, "Let me read the ending for you. Now you know how it ends." That's
I'm not going to give him my new manuscript. That's for sure.
You did say though that you're writing a follow-up or an extension of that book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm writing about the idea of what does this bigger table as an extension of whoever you picture God. What kind of God do I picture, and what is the purpose of my faith? What gets me out in the morning? And so for me, it's going to be the idea that if God is love, and if Jesus is the embodiment of that love, why are so many Christians so hateful? What is the loss in translation, or what is the thing that happens, and how do we keep going and create something that is more pure and beautiful and redemptive? And so that's a journey I'm on, writing that, and it's a challenge in these times to write that, and when so much is happening.
I bet.
Yeah, and the table, that vision of the table, I always think about. Because we're in a month, we celebrate Thanksgiving earlier than you guys do down there. We would do it in October, but
we're thankful earlier too.
Earlier, yeah.
Right.
But there's all this work my family does all the time to create this perfect looking table before we start to eat, right? That everything's in its place. Yeah. But to me, I've always found that the best part of the dinner is at the end when it's a bloody mess. And I always think, when I think of the table fellowship or the bigger table, as you talk about it, it's the messy tables that are the best tables.
Yeah, I mean, we are Christianity and religion in general tends to be more sanitized than it should be, and I think the church and our communities and our relationships should be those places where it can just be all out in the open. And because if God is loving, we have nothing to fear of God. It usually doesn't say anything about God. It's more about our problems, our hangups.
Right. Exactly.
Well, just a couple of shots of the books, Hope and Other Superpowers, which is an incredible book. I love the subtitle, A Life-Affirming, Love-Defending, Butt-Kicking, World-Saving Manifesto. Pick it up. And, of course, A Bigger Table. Get these books and wait to see the new one when it comes out. The other book that's out there is a compilation. Is that? Yeah, compilation of selected writings from stuff that needs to be said. Great as well.
Yeah. I invite everybody to find John on Twitter and follow him, and I've really been enjoying that too. And thanks for challenging too. I mean, that's what part of this is, man. I like to be pushed too, and you do sometimes, and I'm appreciative of that. So that's great.
Thank you so much.
And we're thankful that, because we originally had John scheduled in August. So those of you who follow the webpage and our social media were like, "You got John coming on? What's happened?" Well, what happened is we had some technical difficulties, or John did on his end, being tucked away writing. But he gladly rescheduled, and so we're very thankful that you did that, and that we had a chance to talk to you today. And please know that as November approaches, we're all praying up here, and we're in solidarity with you, and we know there's a lot of work to be done no matter what happens on the 3rd of November. So, certainly hope that there's some relief, at least an opportunity to breathe at the end of that. So,
well, thank you. It's good to know that we're doing the same work from a distance, and who knows, maybe we'll be neighbors soon.
Yeah.
I hope so. That'd be great. Yeah, we'd love to have you here. And you know what? Kevin and I used to live in Windsor, Ontario, which borders Detroit. Yeah. So we were always over in the U.S. I'm looking forward to going back one day because I enjoyed being over there.
Yeah, we can't go now.
All my family's still in Syracuse, so I could just, that's how I rationalize it. It's not abandoning; it's going closer to family.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, John, thanks so much. We really do appreciate your time. Wish you all the best, and hope we do see you down the road. All right.
All right. Keep up the great work. Appreciate you.
Take care now.
All right,
Take care, John. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that was great, Rob. He was excellent.
John was great. Yeah.
What a guy.
Like I said, I really been enjoying following him on Twitter and looking forward to the updated version of the book and some other things that he's going to be writing. So
sorry about the ending, Ian.
Yeah. Sorry to ruin it for you. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. The Titanic sinks at the end too, by the way, if you watch that movie.
Come on.
And Bilbo destroys the ring. So
I should put a spoiler warning in the description of this podcast.
Always good to get together with each other, and to you, our great listeners who've been tuned in and being so faithful. Thank you. If you're a first timer, we hope you enjoyed John and that you'll come back because we got some other great guests coming up. TheVicarsCrossing.com. Check us out on our webpage to follow and watch us on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll keep you up to date with all that. Just want to say hello again to our sponsors and thanks to them as we wrap things up today, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, and to our friends at Molly Maid. Thank you very much. Guys, that was great. Take care.
Yeah.
And we're heading back to church this Sunday. For those of us that are in the Diocese of Huron area. So praying for you, Kevin, and
you
Ian,
too, buddy.
and your parish community, and for everyone, wishing everybody a good return. And it'd be nice to see some familiar faces, even though we might not recognize them with their masks.
Who is that?
Oh yeah, I remember you. Yeah.
Our new parish directory is going to look like this.
like that. Yeah. Well, I was thinking because we just got one and it was late, but when it comes in, I might color mask over everybody, so we recognize
your name
each
on
other.
the mask.
Yeah. All right, guys, take care. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
Kevin George here, St. Aidan's.
My name is Ian. Hello.
Yeah.
And Kevin, remember to always look both ways
before you cross that street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!